Alright, Ronan MMA, welcome back to the channel. The MMA Guru last night did a video on the WEASLE, showing and exposing all of his bias in his Who Really Won video regarding the Islam Makhachevs versus Alexander Volkanovski fight. I am elated that he made this video or decided to make this video because I was contemplating doing this video yesterday morning, but I wasn't sure that I could do it the justice that it needed. I'm not very good at editing videos. I'm not, and he spent a lot of time stamping everything, watching the Weasels video while simultaneously going and finding that exact same moment in the fight to show you the disingenuousness from the Weasel MMA. For those of you who don't know the Weasel MMA, which I'd imagine every single one of you knows, is a YouTuber, an MMA YouTuber, a huge MMA YouTuber, 325,000 subscribers, who regularly, when there's a controversial decision, does these videos where he will break the fight down frame by frame and shows you every single strike that lands. Now, up until the Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz fight, I trusted his judgment completely. But we're going to get into that in just a moment. But before we do, please like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm going to thank you in advance. Thank you very much. We're at 92. I would love to get to 100 by the end of the day. That would mean a lot. It would be a big milestone. The first thousand's hard to get to, so 1/10 is a pretty significant chunk of that. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's try and get that to 100, and thank you in advance. Okay, so as I was saying, I trusted his judgment up until the Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz fight. And it's not a case of if he disagrees with me, then I don't agree with him. He has changed my opinion on multiple fights in the past. But that one was the first real, big stakes fight that included one half of the main event being a Dagestani fighter. And for those of you who don't know, the Weasel has mentioned that he is from that part of the world, and he clearly, very clearly, loves all of those fighters. He praises them more than almost any MMA YouTuber out there, and it's kind of like a running meme, to be honest, how much he likes them. But in that first round of that fight, Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz, that was the swing round for many people. And he was doing this thing where Magomed Ankalaev would throw a teep kick to the body, which were fine strikes, but they were not damaging. And the amount of damage that Jan Blachowicz caused to Magomed's body, visibly, by the way, which we're going to get to that in a minute, was much more than the amount that Ankalaev dished out to Jan Blachowicz. And I remember watching him breaking down that first round, and I went, how are you calling those medium strikes? Because for those of you who don't know, he has a ranking system for the strikes based on light, medium, and heavy. Now, the problem with that is that he's ranking those subjective to what he believes are light, medium, and heavy. And I'm going to show you guys, or, tell you and give examples of how he does not keep the same criteria when he doesn't want to apply it. Like, he will switch up his criteria to benefit his motive, and the MMA Guru did a brilliant job at exposing this. Like, this video, it's a longer video, 35 minutes. I highly recommend you go watch it, regardless of whether or not you like the MMA Guru or how he does his content or any of that. This video is very worthwhile. He did a great job. But in the Ankalaev fight, he was saying, and then, the teep kicks that are just touching toes to Jan Blachowicz's body, never hurt him to the body, never did anything like that, right? And then maybe you could argue, oh, well, that played a factor in gassing Jan out for the later rounds. Well, the Weasel tells you that you cannot cumulatively score damage based on what you see in later rounds, because then you would be retroactively going back and scoring a round for somebody because of the damage that was shown in the third round, which you can't do. And he's correct about that. But the argument that he gives for Jan Blachowicz' leg kicks, which we all know are insane, okay? And he even, when he checks a kick, it oftentimes hurts his opponents. In that fight, he was going shin to shin, inside leg kicks, not given two fucks how badly it hurt him. Has thrown it as hard as he could. And we saw later on in the fight the amount of damage it did to the leg based on the integrity of it. But at the end of that first round, you could see the damage. There was redness, there was swelling, there was all of that. There was a limp on his way back to the corner. If those are not medium strikes, then those teep kicks to the bodies are not. If those teep kicks to the bodies are not, then Ankalaev does not win that first round. And the fight was scored correctly in a draw. So the reason why I said he doesn't keep the same criteria for every fight is because, well, firstly, I want to pull up the dictionary definition of damage, because while scoring criteria is left open for interpretation in a lot of areas, the word damage is pretty clear cut. There's one definition of damage that applies to this scoring criteria. Now, what constitutes damage, I guess, may or may not be subjective. Keep moving my camera, but I just want this for context. So, physical harm caused to something in such a way to impair its value, usefulness, or normal function. Okay. Which I would argue the leg kicks in the opening round from Jan Blachowicz to the legs of Magomed Ankalaev did just that right there. In particular, impair its value, usefulness, or normal function. Because, yeah, we didn't see him start dropping from leg kicks until later in the second round, I think, but obviously it impaired the usefulness of his legs and definitely caused damage to, like, the structural integrity and normal function and all of that stuff. So in that sense, he did not use that scoring criteria. Now I'm gonna have to pull this up on YouTube on my phone because I'm clunky and I'm not good at preparing for videos. So he responded to the MMA Guru's video in the comment section with some extremely disingenuous points, but I'm going to go to the one that stuck out to me the most. Now, this was regarding a punch in which Volkanovski, and by the way, he scored round 2 for Volkanovski, for all of you out there that didn't, breaking the fight down frame by frame. It probably killed him inside to do so, but he had to. And the most egregious round, where he not only diminished the strikes of Alexander Volkanovski and exaggerated the strikes of Islam Makhachev, he straight up left some out. And the round in which he did this the most egregiously was round 3. And at the end of that round, their strike numbers were almost dead even. So had he not, there was about 4, maybe 5 strikes that he left out. And then if you were to go and use the actual scoring criteria, or not just be extremely biased towards one fighter, Volkanovski would have many more medium strikes than he should have. Islam Makhachev would have many less heavy and medium strikes than he should have. And he would have had to have given that round to Volkanovski because, in my opinion, round 3 is easier to score for Volk than round 2 was. In my opinion, round 2 was the hard round to score. 5's clear. 4, to me, is a good argument, but I'll leave it because many people aren't ready for that conversation. I truly wish that every MMA fan would be given out like a copy of the scoring criteria, but it is what it is. I'm going to leave round 4 alone and just give it to Makhachev, even though he did little to no work when he had Volkanovski's back, which is not effective grappling. He was holding him in a position which is a change of position, the same way that, dipping and diving and jumping into range on a taller fighter is a change of position. And I know that to a lot of you guys that's going to sound stupid, but like it is what it is, man. I wish you guys would read the scoring criteria, or for those of you that disagree anyways. But anyways, so he says here, this was a good shot that Volkanovski landed, a right hand, a right hook, where he put almost goddamn near everything into it. And this is why I'm asking you guys to watch the MMA Guru's video, because he does this in slow motion in the fight and the frame by frame, and he compares it to the WEASLE. to the Weasel's showing of this punch. Volkanovski twists the hips, dips down, like he gets his right hand low. He comes up, his foot goes off. He has as much torque in that punch that you could possibly generate in a punch. Like, he puts everything into it, and he cracks Islam Makhachev square in the face. It landed. It looked like it landed around this area. So, not a KO punch, but the criteria doesn't need it to be a KO punch or a knockdown in order to give it like a medium or even a heavy strike, which we see because he gives Islam Makhachev in that video many heavy strikes, probably about 3 of them that are that don't qualify under heavy in anybody else's opinion who isn't a part of the DDR community. Okay, so he says, watch the punch in real time. The punch has nothing on it. You have to watch these punches in real time. Slow motion and frame by frame too. Also, if the punch doesn't phase the opponent, it doesn't count as if it does. It's all about the damage seen from the opponent, not the form of the punch. You can swing a haymaker, but if it does not affect the opponent, then it will be considered a light strike. That is fucking garbage. That is fucking garbage. That means that every single strike that has ever been landed on Nate Diaz besides Josh Thompson's fucking head kick, or maybe like a couple of Jorge Masvidal's body kicks, were light strikes. Because, well, they didn't affect him. He's got one of the best chins in MMA. So if you have the best chin in MMA, guys, just go fucking out there and take as many punches as you can, and don't think about numbers, how many times you've been hit compared to how many times you've hit your opponent, because if it doesn't affect you, then it's just a light strike. That is the most brain-dead fucking take I have ever... I can't believe he unironically said that as a response to, I want you guys to go watch that punch. He's saying that he's focusing on the form of the punch because the MMA guru accentuates how hard that punch had to have been based on the form of Volkanovski, which, if you know anything about throwing a punch, where he gave Islam a medium strike from an arm punch, his, like, literally zero technique whatsoever, just swung his arm out there and got Volkanovski on the face. Didn't rock him, didn't cause a cut, didn't do any visible damage whatsoever, and he gave him a medium strike for it. Whereas when Volkanovski correctly, with the technique that you use to gain torque, to throw a hard hook, unlike a little flying arm punch, which is what Islam got a medium strike for, he's saying that, well, you can't look at that. The MMA guru is just showing you that to highlight the torque and power that had to have been behind that shot, because we know Volkanovski's a big, strong dude with big, powerful legs, and he can hit hard. So if he put everything into that punch, technique-wise and torque-wise, you can see all of his muscles tensing up. There's no way that's a light strike. There's no way. It was the best shot of the round, and Volk got a light strike for it, whereas Islam was given medium strikes for tiny little arm punches, and he gave Islam Makhachev a medium strike for one that we couldn't even see land clean. That is not how damage is scored. That is actually ridiculous, and I can't believe he said that. And somebody told me in my last video that when I do that with my words, I'm talking like Brendan Schaub. First of all, side note, Brendan Schaub was not the first person on planet Earth to start drawing out the length of words to, like, accentuate them or anything. He stole that, by the way, from Will Sasso, who had it stolen from him by Brian Callen and the likes of Crystalia, and then Brendan Schaub did it because he can't come up with his own funny stuff, and he knows that when people tell stories like that, it sounds funny, so he tries to do it. So I'm not talking like Brendan Schaub. Okay, I don't say both. Or, yeah. Anyways. That was a tangent. Shit, where was I? Damage, dude. That is not how you score damage. It's actually people like to act like the scoring criteria is a total mess, which in some aspects it is, for sure. But it kind of lays out, like, it's left up to interpretation the same way that, like, a lawyer reading a law might be left up to interpretation. But in certain times, like we saw during, I don't want to get off into it, but we saw during the Emergencies Act committee hearing for Canada here. This isn't going to apply to a lot of you, but our Prime Minister's lawyers took a law and interpreted it in a way which in the law, it literally tells you underneath the law how you're supposed to interpret it. So certain things in certain laws are left up to interpretation. Other laws, like this one, had a specific reading, a specific paragraph section telling you how you're supposed to interpret it. So it's not really left up to interpretation. You can't change the way that they're telling you, yeah, this may seem like it can be left up to interpretation, and maybe you could squint your eyes and look at it this way. But no, we want you to read it like this. Now, when it comes to the scoring criteria, damage, and this is where I think it's flawed, it tells you what damage is. It says, like, lacerations and cuts, right? Bruising, swelling, all this stuff, redness, or if you visibly hurt an opponent, meaning you rock him, which I guess is a way to make up for the fact that if you are a sniper-like striker, where you're hitting a guy on the chin, this whole area, chin, I mean jaw, right? There's not going to really be any physical damage shown unless you've broken his jaw and then there's some swelling, but that's extremely rare in fights. It wouldn't be. Like, you'd think it wouldn't be. But how often does that honestly happen? If you're a dude hitting a guy on the chin over and over and over and over again, he's not really going to show any damage. Whereas if you land a grazing punch on the eyebrow and it splits homie wide open, then you're going to see it. It's going to be super noticeable. And I think that it even can sway judges' opinions in later rounds, right? Like, because you'll see the cut happen in real time. It'll be bleeding like crazy. So you're like, okay, he did damage that round. You'll score that round for this guy. He goes back to his corner. Cutman does a phenomenal job cleaning it up, getting to stop the bleeding. 2 minutes into the next round, Vaseline falls off, guy's bleeding again, and then to the judges, it's like, oh, look, he's bleeding again. He must, you know what I mean? And then that damage that was done in the first round can then be scored again for the second round. I don't think cuts are the end-all be-all, and I don't think swollenness. I think that if you are an avid watcher of MMA or boxing, you can tell what a hard, medium, or light strike looks like. That's why I'm imploring you to please go watch the MMA Guru's video. He does a very, very good job at this. And he does not keep the same energy when it comes to many fighters, because we saw all the redness on Magomed Anklayev's shin in that first round. We saw the swelling on his shin, whereas Jan Blachowicz' leg looked brand new. Because, for whatever reason, Jan Blachowicz, like, people used to say, Romero's legs felt like they were made out of metal. Jan Blachowicz' legs actually are made out of metal. Have you seen his feet? They are the weirdest shape, the top of his foot, I mean. They look like I would never want to be kicked by them anywhere. But he said that in that fight, we can't score the damage that we know came from later on because it was later on, it wasn't in the first round. Well, no, there's visible damage to go off of right there. But so he also doesn't keep the same cutting, swelling, and lacerations and redness, all that stuff, or hurting the opponent. He doesn't keep this in mind when he's scoring strikes for Volkanovski. He says it doesn't affect Islam. First of all, you can have a great poker face, and it can look like it doesn't affect you. I'm sure that happens many times in Nate Diaz fights, where the guy's got such a good poker face that you just don't know that it hurt him. Or like in round 1 of Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 2. Conor McGregor hurt Dustin Poirier with a good shot. It was kind of like a straight uppercut. It was a weird punch, or it was like a jab from under. So it looked like you know what I mean? And Dustin said, I don't think he realized how badly he hurt me. And I didn't realize how badly he got hurt until he said that. Then I went back and watched, and I went, oh, he did get his bell rung, and you can kind of see it, but he has a great poker face. So You can't just say because someone has a great chin or a great poker face that strike was not damaging, because whether or not it rocked an opponent is not the only, because that's kind of what he's getting at. He also gives one of the examples in his video where he says Volkanovski was what did he say, frozen in his tracks for a moment or something like that, or like didn't know where he was for a second. If you go back and watch the fight, and the MMA Guru shows this, Volkanovski fired back and continued forward less than a second after that shot landed. Like, it's not even in the next frame. The guy is being completely dishonest with this stuff. And that shot that landed, he missed out a knee that Volk landed. He missed out multiple body shots that Volk landed, calling them light strikes, where the angle that he used in his freeze frame video, yeah, it does kind of look like, and he does this little trick where he shows the punch about to land, and then he shows after the punch goes through and comes out the other side. So if you watch his freeze frames, it looks like, oh, well, yeah, it probably didn't land. It probably just skimmed off the body of Makhachev, but that's not true. It landed. He dug it, dude. It was a nice, clean body shot, and he got like a light strike for it because he said that it grazed. I just can't. He's done this now multiple times. And it's so funny to me that I think what happened while he was making that video, he did it a little bit in the second round, but not enough to give the round to Makhachev. And you know this guy wants to give these rounds to Makhachev. That probably ate him up inside. And he went, if I don't score round 3 from Makhachev, I have to make a video saying that he really lost. My biggest fan base is the DDRs, because that's all I really talk about. Or, you know, those are the fighters he gives the most praise to. Like, he did not want to come out and say that Makhachev should have lost that fight, I think, because round 3 was much more egregious than round 2 in the things that he left out, the exaggeration. But when I say he doesn't keep the same criteria, so when he says that massive right hook that was like a haymaker, essentially, like Volkanov, it wasn't tight. He put everything into it. Everything. And it probably caused some visible damage to Makhachev that, again, like, sometimes too, bruising and swelling doesn't show up right away, so it's also a little flawed in that sense. Because, like, a guy's eye might get red and, like, a little bit swollen, and then you see them after the fight, and you're like, whoa, what happened to you? Did you get mauled by a bear? And so there's definitely flaws, but we have to go off of what we have. Right? We can complain about the scoring criteria all day long, and there's changes that I think should be made. I think that if you're scoring rounds on a 10-point must system, and you have 4 rounds in a row where, so this is gonna sound weird, but if I explain it first, it might not sound as weird. When you have 4 rounds in a row, like we had, where there's not a whole lot of damaging strikes that get, like, nobody seriously out-damaged anybody in that fight from rounds 1 through 4. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. There was not a whole lot of damage dealt out, like, egregiously on either side. So every single one of those rounds gets scored a 10-9, no matter who you scored it to. Then we have a round like 10-8, or then we have a round like round 5, where Volkanovski drops Islam and then gets on top of him and beats him for like a minute and a bit, to the point where Islam's looking up at, scared at the camera, like, looking at the clock. I think that round should be scored relative to the rest of the rounds and be a 10-8. And I'm not just saying this for this fight. This happens all the time, where you see, like, a guy will eke out 2 close rounds, and then the dude knows, oh, I'm down 2 rounds, I gotta go get him. Goes out there and drops him a bunch of, you know what I mean? Gets scored a 10-9. They should be scored relative to one another, right? I think that would be a more fair system. And I'm not just saying this to complain about this fight, because I think without that rule, Volkanovski wins. So I don't need that rule implemented. But I think that the 10-8s really should be, because those 10-8s are extremely flawed in the scoring criteria. They are seriously left up to interpretation. Like, badly. Those are not ideal. But he says that it doesn't affect Islam, so it cannot be scored more than a light strike. Okay, great, as Chael Sonnen would say. Okay, great. When Islam Makhachev landed that big elbow, which I agree was a great elbow, that was a very nice elbow, that was clean, landed hard, it did, it was a hard elbow. Volk didn't give two fucks. He straightened out, nodded, and went right back at him. He wasn't rocked, he wasn't cut, he didn't have a fucked up swollen eye. He stood up, and then went at him. So how was that given a heavy strike when it didn't affect Volkanovski whatsoever? Even a little bit. And guys, these are just a few examples of this. But I noticed this, like I said, after the Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz fight, and it drove me nuts to my core. I watched that fight live with my brother. And I said to him, this could very well be a draw. And he goes, you know what? I wouldn't be mad at that. He's like, I could see that. That does. And then we were talking it over with each other before the decision got read. And we came to the conclusion that, yeah, you can give Jan Blachowicz rounds 1, 2, 3, Magomed 4, and a 10-8 in round 5. Done deal, draw. One judge got it right. Thankfully, he did, because the other two judges got it in the opposite directions. So it turned out to be a draw. Man, I'm wondering if that's the first time that we've seen a scorecard where one guy scores it for one guy, the other guy scores it for the other guy, and then the other guy scores it a draw, but I digress. And then he goes out there, makes like a 5-minute long video, because he just ends the discussion in round 1. Done deal, guys. Look at those teep kicks where Jan Blachowicz takes a step back to help absorb the damage. Like, if somebody lands a hard teep kick on you, the last thing you want to do is step into it, right? Because if you were to take a step forward while he's throwing that teep kick, you're going to get those toes. They're going to dig up. It wouldn't be nice. So what Jan Blachowicz does instead is like essentially the same thing as rolling with a punch. He steps back with it. Like, he lets it kind of just, he doesn't try to stand there and eat it like a Terminator. He allows the momentum to push him back, because oftentimes teep kicks they're very similar to like a push kick. Like, there's different ways to throw it and more damaging ways to throw it for sure. But you'd either see somebody get lifted up if they like stepped into it and caught it real bad, or you would see Jan Blachowicz just goes back, just relaxed. And it's essentially the same thing as rolling with a punch. He scored those all medium, even though Jan Blachowicz had zero visible damage on his body whatsoever. Whereas at the end of that first round, Magomed Ankalaev's whole one side of his body was beet red, leg and body. And he did it again here, dude. And it's a trend. It's a trend. He does it for the Dagestanis. Or, I'm sure he would do it for guys like Shavkat Rakhmonov as well, who's not from Dagestan, but he loves that. Any Eastern Bloc fighters are getting that treatment from the Weasel. And it's really frustrating to watch, because he's just diminishing time and time again Volkanovski strikes, which are good strikes. Multiple body shots that could easily be scored medium. Just get brushed off. Oh, that grazed. He counted. Oh, dude. I'm going to wrap this up quickly because I don't want to keep going, but he counted a punch landing for Islam. When Volk stepped in to throw, Islam threw a counter right hook that missed. And essentially what ended up happening is Islam corralled the back of Volkanovski's head with like this part of his arm and then pulled him in for a clinch. That cannot be counted as a landing strike. I don't understand. I can't fathom that. How that can be a landing strike. This is not, even if you were to land with your forearm, this part, You'd want to be landing with the outside, and you wouldn't want to be because Paul Felder broke his arm like that. But, you know, you'd want to be landing with like this. Not. He corralled him into it. It was a clinch engagement. He calls it a strike. And that third round was so close that had he not done this, not diminished, the power of Volkanovski's strikes, or the lightness, mediumness, heaviness of them, blatantly left some out. Okay, go watch it, please. The MMA Guru's video, he blatantly left out strikes that Volkanovski threw half a second before another strike that he included, which means he had to have seen it. And then exaggerates the effect that Islam's punches have on Volkanovski, man. I can't, dude, it's actually so infuriating. And another thing that he does is he gets really upset about the pound for pound rankings. He did a video where he's saying that he doesn't agree with any of the panelists' decisions or reasons given as to why Volk should remain pound for pound number one, which I don't really give a shit. It's a stupid argument. But he says that somebody imagining if Islam was a featherweight, what would happen is a completely stupid reason to give for why, like, what your reasoning is for pound, even though it's not, because the whole idea of pound for pound is to imagine if DJ, right, if Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson was a 6'4", 205er, and he fought John Jones, who wins? Skill for skill. That's what the idea behind it was. Now, yeah, we both had him weigh in at 155. I would have loved to see what they weigh-in day officially, because when they stepped in there, they were not pound for pound. They weighed in pound for pound the day before, but regardless, he says that it's a stupid, if you think that he won the fight, that's a bad one as well, which it kind of is. But I will say this, he didn't keep that same energy when it came to Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz. When Israel Adesanya went up and fought Jan Blachowicz and lost at least 4 rounds, in my opinion. He lost the striking rounds, not just the grappling rounds, because of Jan Blachowicz's metal shins, without surgery too. It's quite impressive. Israel Adesanya remained ahead of Jan Blachowicz pound for pound, because Israel Adesanya because these media members factor in what they want to factor in when it's convenient for them, the same way that you do, Weasel, when you make these videos. And they were probably looking at Israel Adesanya's resume as opposed to Jan Blachowicz's resume as a champion, even though Jan Blachowicz just fucked up Israel Adesanya. Like, he didn't beat him up to the point where he looked fucked up, but he beat him. He schooled him in all departments. Okay. And Israel Adesanya remained above Jan Blachowicz in the pound-for-pound list. So I want you guys who are upset about that to keep that same energy when we see it happen with other superstars like Izzy. And I honestly, it's probably because Volk's a white dude fighting a Muslim guy, and Israel Adesanya's not a white guy fighting a super white guy, so nobody cares when that happens there that one way, right? Because we would hear about all this complaining on Twitter, and we all know that Twitter hates white people. So the weasel's a weasel is my conclusion, and I beg of you guys to go watch the MMA Guru's video, even if you can't stand him. I know there's a lot of people that don't like him because he's like top tier level troll. He's so good at what he does, guys. Like, you can't take shit so seriously, but he takes this one seriously, and he breaks it down very well. That's it. Like and subscribe. I'm gonna thank you in advance. Thank you so much. Let's try to get to 100 by the end of the day, and I will see you on my picks video for this fight week. See ya.